a plan by which planning decisions on growth in terms of where new homes and in primarily industrial development can take place across Cheltenham, Gloucester and Tewkesbury, and conversely where it can't take place. Now we are in an election year, and for those who may have been on the last property in construction Zoom event, I talked quite extensively about the difference between the three main parties and their approach to planning and development, with very much the Conservatives adopting a sort of business as usual approach and keeping out to the green belt, the Labour Party appearing to do the polar opposite in terms of going on a growth agenda, and the Liberal Democrats somewhere sitting on the fence between the two, depending on what age of a Liberal Democrat supporter you are. And that's
sort of partly changing levels.
Sorry. Okay, moving sort of swiftly on. That's not a party political point I was making. What I'm going to talk about is what's known as the strategic local plan. So that is known as the SLP, which is the replacement for the JCS. Now, I'll apologise now in terms of me using three-letter acronyms. My industry is festooned with these damn things, and just trying to provide a convenient summary of what's going on. So at the moment, the three authorities, Cheltenham, Gloucester and Tewkesbury, have come together to produce the strategic and local plan. Now, what you should be able to see here is the first one of a series of slides on screen showing the options which they are considering. Now, what this shows is very simply the area that is covered by the strategic and local plan. So you've got Cheltenham in the middle here, got Gloucester over to the west, and then everything else around on the outside is Tewkesbury. And what they have before us is 6 options for growth that they're actively considering. And this isn't something that's fixed at the moment. They went out to consultation earlier towards the end of last year, simply looking for everybody's views on levels of proposed development. And of the 6 options, the first one is urban concentration. Now, the challenge the new strategic and local plan faces is it has to find land to provide up to 35,000 new homes and up to 180 hectares of employment land. Now, some of that has already been accounted for, but that's the magnitude of development that they are looking to accommodate, and this has to be accommodated by 2041, which is when the plan ends. So the first option they are looking at is providing housing basically within the existing urban areas of Cheltenham, Gloucester, and to a lesser extent, Tewkesbury. Now, the problem with this is that very simply, there's not enough land available for them to meet their development requirements. The benefit of it is you obviously stay out of the green belt and you don't build on the floodplain, and you just don't put any significant amount of development in any of the rural settlements that are sort of in the surrounding area. The second option that they are looked at is urban extensions. Now, this scenario too involves urban extensions going into the green belt. Now, the detail on this plan, or lack of detail, is deliberate. Because it's a joint plan prepared by 3 different authorities. You have 3 different political administrations, if you will, and what the planners who prepared the SLP had to do was strike the right balance between the detail wanted by one authority relative to another. And what you can see here is that this is development. These are urban extensions around Cheltenham, Gloucester and Tewkesbury that would primarily look to go into the green belt. So in the case of Cheltenham, you already have land at West Cheltenham and Northwest Cheltenham accounted for, but looking at a potential new option of further extending into the greenbelt westwards of Cheltenham, but critically east of the M5. Potential further expansion of Cheltenham southwards out towards Sherdington, or as an alternative, the extension of Cheltenham northwards. Now to the east of the railway line, so in the area that's Hyde Lane, Hunting Butts as a potential option. Moving over to Gloucester, Again, it's the same continued expansion of Innsworth and Long Levens and building out that way and heading up towards Churchdown. Could that see Greenbelt being removed there? As well as the potential further southern expansion of Gloucester outside of its administrative boundary, going over into Stroud District, something which Stroud has already accounted for, and those who watch the press may have seen a recent application being put in by Taylor Wimpey for circa 2,000 houses in this part of the county. And then finally, going up to Tewkesbury itself, again, it's the sort of Odessa farm area. Now, the problem with Tewkesbury, I should say, or the challenge Tewkesbury faces, is obviously the floodplain, and that's very systemic across the whole area, and it's ensuring that development isn't provided in the floodplain, and that therefore limits your opportunities, especially around Tewkesbury on the western and southern side in particular. But there are some areas which don't flood, notably around Odessa Farm. New housing potentially at Ashchurch on the opposite side of the motorway, and then up at what's known as Mitten, which is in sort of Wychhaven. And this is probably one of the most controversial scenarios that they've consulted on, by virtue of the fact it involves going into the Greenbelt, and it's a very nice picture in terms of explaining what the difference is between the three political parties. Labour would look for Greenbelt growth. Conservatives probably wouldn't, although may look to accept some. Liberal Democrats, certainly from having seen what Max Wilkinson, who's odds on going to be the next MP for Cheltenham, whether his party would support further development in the Greenbelt definitely remains to be seen, because they've always been anti-Greenbelt development. The third option is providing housing outside of the Greenbelt, and principally as urban extensions to Cheltenham, Gloucester and Tewkesbury. Now, this plan shows quite conveniently that around Cheltenham, where you've got this sort of light green shading, there isn't any option for that. There is some options for Tewkesbury, and there's obviously South Gloucester, and that's about as far as it can go. Now, what this highlights is the difficulties that are associated with that approach. The fourth option, which is really interesting because we've never seen one really being promoted within sort of the JCS area so far, is a new settlement. So this is genuinely a freestanding new town with all the services, facilities, and employment opportunities. Not an expansion, not something that's bolted on to an existing settlement, but genuinely freestanding new settlement. And there's a couple of options that have been floated here. Principally the other side of Junction 10 on the M5, the western side of Junction 10 on the M5, somewhere north, I'm assuming north of Bishop's Cleeve, and then out towards the Forest of Dean. Now, the issue with these plans, as I said, is they are not very specific, and that is deliberate, because all that they are doing is they're looking, the planners and the authorities concerned are looking for people's views on the various ideas that are being put forward. The fifth scenario is the sort of scattergun approach of putting growth in the various settlements all over the SLP area, and that can be everything ranging from small developments on the outskirts of Cheltenham and Gloucester, where they're still available, again in the Greenbelt, then going to Winchcombe, Bishop's Cleeve, Gotherington, Appley, any small rural settlement you can think of, which has the basics of a village shop, pub, and a primary school, is an ideal candidate for receiving some additional housing. And then the final option is sustainable transport. Now, this is built around the sustainable transport corridor, which is highlighted in purple, running from Bishop's Cleeve in the north down through Cheltenham, across the M5 gap, if you will. So that's Gloucestershire Airport, the Staverton area, and then down into the heart of Gloucester, and then heading off south to Quedgeley and Stroud and beyond. Now, this really is tied around one piece of infrastructure which is going in at the moment, which is the footpath cycle link that is very heavy, being nearly completed between Cheltenham and Gloucester, and at the moment is just starting to be put in place in the north, on the south side of Bishop's Cleeve. So in the fullness of time, it will be fully possible to cycle all the way from Bishop's Cleeve through to Gloucester on a purpose-built, safe cycle route, rather than sort of taking one's life in one's hands on the A435 in the morning. Now, the benefit of this approach is that you are genuinely providing opportunities for people to get out of their car, which is one of the underlying principles that the plan is looking to support, irrespective of whether it's got a petrol engine or diesel engine, or it's indeed an EV. The emerging trends that are being seen is to have people essentially walking and cycling, and indeed using electric scooters, because obviously the program has been in Cheltenham for several years now. It's sort of considered to be a good success story, and facilitating people moving between these various urban areas is something that's been very high on the county's radar, and putting the infrastructure in place to support this is certainly something to be supported. So this is what they've done. They've run this consultation. They've effectively tabled these 6 options for people to consider, and they've had their responses. I noticed there's a number of property professionals in the room. No doubt you'll have interests looking after your clients, and you've dutifully protected those through the process. So what happens now? Well, what happens is that the councils are currently in the process of reviewing all the representations which will have been received, from everything from people promoting thousands of new homes down to people promoting a couple of houses, and on the side of a village. They'll take all those into account and then start to consider what's going to happen, or how they're going to adjust the plan for the next round of consultation. Now, that next round of consultation at the moment won't take place until March 2025 at the earliest, and in roughly a year from now, we're going to be looking hopefully at a more refined version of this plan, which is probably going to be an amalgamation of all 6 development options. Not one development scenario won't succeed. It will be a mix, but the question is how much of a mix of the 6 it will be, and how the numbers are distributed across the 6. So once they've done that, and we have a more detailed plan coming forward, they will then produce what's known as their Regulation 19 version, which is then the next stage of consultation, which won't take place until January 2026 at the earliest. And this will be a definitive statement on behalf of the 3 councils in terms of how they see this SLP area meeting its development requirements up to 2041. And it's a really sort of exciting time, because what we'll see there is a plan that's being prepared in light of the change of a government. Now, what that will mean for planning, at this point, it's sort of rampant speculation. Will there be planning reform? Yes, there will be, but equally, the authorities are being told to get on with this and get this plan prepared. So that's a sort of brief overview of what's going on, the big picture, if you will, for Cheltenham, Gloucester, and Tewkesbury. I should say that Cotswold at the moment are starting a similar process. Forest and Dean are in the same position, and Stroud's local plan is sort of bogged down at the moment, with it being examined by an independent government inspector. And I guess one of the things, from my side, I can talk about this all day long, but Angela's pledged me to keep no more than 15, 20 minutes. And I'm very happy to do that. Why is this important? Because it's setting out really how an area is going to evolve. We make decisions now in terms of my profession, advising our clients, advising our landowners about how something's going to change. And this is the part where people get involved in that process. And if you get involved, you can help steer it. Over the years, over the 27 years I've been practicing, I've had landowners come to me saying, oh, I want to do this or that. And very simply, they never got involved at the right time, and they got completely locked out of the process. And they had a brilliant scheme, brilliant ideas, but they couldn't execute them properly because the plans didn't allow them to do what they wanted to do. So by sort of sharing this knowledge with you this morning, it's sort of explaining to you, look, this is some of the big items, big decisions that are going to be made, and you've got to get involved with it. If you don't want to get involved, fine, but at least have an understanding of what's going on rather than sort of just trying to be a passenger in the process. Now, this actually then links to Cheltenham and Gloucester in terms of urban regeneration. In Gloucester at the moment, the hot project, if you will, is the Forum, which is fantastic in terms of watching it come, slowly coming to fruition. I mean, we've watched for several years as this sort of rather down-at-heel corner of the city centre has been spectacularly regenerated into something that the city should be quite rightfully proud of, and hopefully the economic impact will be nothing but extremely positive for the city. That's a brilliant project, but it's still not enough in terms of the quantum of development that's got to take place. Cheltenham, on the other hand, we've got the municipal offices and we've got House of Fraser, both two very interesting landmark town centre projects. The plan, this SLP, feeds into that narrative of what happens there. Things will change in Cheltenham Town Centre because of, in part, of some of the policies and proposals and the approach that the three authorities take to urban regeneration. How are they going to facilitate it? How could they possibly make it more straightforward or less onerous for the owners of those buildings to come forward? And I just appreciate that one of them happens to be the Borough Council. But it's those rules that one puts in place that makes it difficult or easier for a site to come forward in a better way. So that's really what you've got to think about and why this is important. And the other thing I just wanted to briefly touch on this morning is planning enforcement, and this is particularly pertinent for those who are estate agents, land agents, conveyancing solicitors, people who are going through the process of purchasing property or advising on the acquisition of property, anything that involves the buying and selling of property, and there is an enforcement issue. Now, enforcement is when somebody has built something or done something without planning permission and it needs to get regularized. At the moment, the traditional enforcement time limits, that's the period in which a council can take action against somebody who's been in breach, is 4 years or 10 years. Now, the government last year made it clear that they were going to change the rules, that the 4-year rule, which covers the vast majority of things, whether that's buildings that get built without planning permission or the creation of a new house without planning permission, is all covered at the moment by the 4-year rule. The government made it clear last year that they were going to remove the 4-year rule and put everything to 10 years. And as an industry, we've been sat there thinking, right, when is this rule change going to actually take place and what's going to be the procedure for doing it? Well, as of last week, the government produced the relevant guidance to say that as of the 25th of April, the enforcement period will change from 4 years to 10. Well, sorry, let me start this bit again. The 4-year rule will no longer exist. Everything goes bluntly to 10 years. Now, if you are in the process of buying and selling a property or involved in property that you know that there is an enforcement issue and that they could claim 4 years immunity, it is in your best interest to get that application to regularize all of that in place before the 25th of April, because applications that are made before the 25th of April are still treated under the old 4-year regime. Anything after that date is automatically 10 years. Now, enforcement is an important part of the planning process. This is not condoning any sort of legal activity, I hasten to add. These are the tools that are currently available to property owners and their advisors to adjust the situation. 4 years is a lot easier in terms of a time frame to swallow than something going to 10 years. And at the moment, we're advising a number of companies on this particular rule as we're dealing with bank sales into the properties where there's been a lot of egregious breaches of planning control, and property portfolios are looking rather doubtful, or the value in a property portfolio is looking rather doubtful as a result. So it's a complicated minefield. There's a closing window. Everything goes to 10 years on the 25th of April, and you'd be well advised to seek immediate advice about how to rectify this and understand your position. And Angela, I've probably droned on for a little bit too long. So shall I hand back to you?
Thank you, Nathan. No, really interesting though. I mean, you can just see how those changes are going to impact hugely on people. So do you want to just stop sharing your slides and then I can, yeah, brilliant. I can just bring us all back together. Does anybody have any questions? I know that Dave from Zentano, you were asking about the Worcestershire area and Wychavon. Are you there, Dave? Where have you gone?
Yeah, I just wondered whether there was a similar conversation and whether Nathan's aware there's a similar conversation going on up there, because we have construction clients in both areas, so it's quite relevant for us.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, nice to meet you. It's a perfectly good question. The simple answer is yes. They are doing something similar, but they are a lot more advanced. They've actually produced a replacement for what's known as the South Worcestershire Development Plan, which is now known as the South Worcestershire Development Plan Review. That is before two government inspectors at the moment who are currently picking over that plan in some considerable detail.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Anybody else have a question at all, or have a view on what Nathan's just talked about? I had one question for you, didn't I, actually, Nathan? And it might be my ignorance, but just, you know, when we look at the climate change and we look at the amount of water we've had in the last 12 months, I mean, it is absolutely phenomenal. So how is that then taken into account? Because obviously we've got the typical floodplain areas that we know traditionally have flooded, but then we keep hearing about, you know, areas that haven't flooded for ages are now, you know, high risk areas. So how's that going to be accounted for in all of that? Is there work that's done on that?
Yeah, that there is. I mean, the Environment Agency can regularly review their plans, and when you're looking at any major development sites in their own right, it's always incumbent on the technical team that's advising the developer to actually look at the flood risk issue, because there's a lot that comes up through essentially local intelligence, if you will, that the concerned third parties raise this issue of, we all know what the 2007 floods did for the county, and we know what the changes to the floodplain mapping resulted from that. Going forward, applications can go in on sites that aren't in the floodplain, but there may be other issues associated with overland surface water movements that mean there is a flood risk, not necessarily from the rivers, if you will, but simply from topography and the way water moves through an area. I'm developing a site at the moment where we've got that exact issue, and it's the same level of attention and detail that goes into addressing that flood risk. You can still build in these areas, but you just need to make sure that technical work's being done.
Oh, thank you. It's just we've had so much water just where we are. I've just noticed the difference, you know, in the garden and the land and all of that. And if it continues to rain the way it has, we might all need to go to work in a boat rather than a car. Or definitely in our wellies rather than high heel shoes or trainers. Okay, no, that is really, really interesting. So what I'm going to do is Nathan's going to share those slides with us. We'll share them with you, and we'll also include his details as well, because that way you can reach out and ask any questions afterwards as well. That was really insightful, and actually, you know, it's exciting seeing all this coming. So yeah, so really, really good news. Get involved. That's what I would say. Okay. So we are now going to move on to William Ackerman. So William is CEO of Connectar, and we thought it was a great opportunity just for William to give you some of the latest data and research with the focus on green skills. So, you know, lots of US companies are working on net zero. And actually, what is that going to mean for you? You know, who are the people you're going to need in your business? So William's going to share with us some of the data research, what the big companies are doing, and maybe some insights into how that might help you when you're moving your business forward. So William, over to you.
Thank you very much, Angela, and I love that segue to the flooding and green skills. Great to be here, everyone. I'm Will. I'm the founder and MD of Connectar. We're a small, medium-sized company. We have an office in London, but also I think you might have met a couple of my colleagues based in our Cheltenham office, Kate and Simon. And as Angela said, we as an organisation work predominantly with large companies, and we work with them on 3 themes: education engagement, and that's working with schools, FE colleges and universities. And we work with large employers who ultimately hope to hire people from education to join their workforce. We also have a recruitment strand, and that's especially focused in Cheltenham with Kate. And we focus again on early careers, but also later in careers. And the companies we tend to work with are small and medium sized, I would say, rather than the very largest companies. And we also have developed a mentoring platform, which helps with career development, and that tends to be used by large companies. We work across sector with all sorts of companies. You would know them all. So people like Heathrow, Atkins, some construction companies, National Grid, British Airways, and so on. And what I'm hoping might be useful for you is if I share some of the thinking and some of the planning that's going on with those large companies, there'll be a couple of points that actually could really resonate with you. So I'm just going to kind of set the scene, and then I'll share some slides specifically around why we've brought together employers and stakeholders on green skills and green jobs of the future. We've worked for National Grid for about 3 years. And for National Grid, they have an enormous challenge. They have 30 years worth of infrastructure projects that they need to condense and deliver in 7 years. I think it's pretty much impossible. And I think quietly they will say it's impossible, but that's the target. And the reason for that acceleration is all around achieving net zero or getting in shape for it. Part of the program we're working with them is engaging education and preparing young people for those green jobs. And National Grid are hiring apprentices to fill roles right now, and they have an enormous deficit in terms of need for skills, especially in what they consider as green jobs. Because of that, I talk to a lot of employers and a lot of stakeholders, education, kind of research companies, government departments, and one of the things that was obvious last year was this enormous kind of gap in talking about green skills, and different organizations, different stakeholders kind of siloed information they have and different point they were on reaching that. And there was a great gap. Some employers were really on the front foot, energy, construction, infrastructure companies really kind of leading the charge, other sectors much further behind. But the biggest kind of gap, I suppose, is that those in education, schools and colleges and students have really no sight of green skills and what's coming just around the corner. And so we brought those stakeholders together for a couple of meetings last year in person. And what I hope to do is just share with you some of those findings and some of those insights from those stakeholders. So I'm representing others on this call to you, and I hope that some of it will be interesting. So I'm just going to share my slide.
Yes, we can just see the next slide coming. But yes,
okay.
your first slide.
I can live with that if you can live with that.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. Interview, that might help. Okay. So we brought together a group of organisations, and just to give you some context on what a green job is. There are so many different definitions, but 3 buckets, I think, is a good way of looking at it, and kind of very green to light green, I guess, or pure green, jobs related to obvious things like solar systems or farming. Enhanced green, interestingly, I think is a real key one, where there are existing jobs, but they're becoming more green, and architects and accountants might fall into that category. And then jobs impacted by green, perhaps electricians. This first bit of research, Nesta has been working on this for 3 years. They're a team of 3 full-time people looking at data and research. And one of the interesting findings that I think could be relevant for this meeting, this group, is that the appetite among employees, especially those younger employees, is enormous. 70%, according to Nesta, want to have a career that benefits the environment, And of those, almost a quarter would happily accept a lower salary if they believe that that employer is benefiting the environment. Meanwhile, 67% of employers who need green skills have struggled to fill those roles. So really interesting and usable bits of information there. In terms of green skills, widespread shortage, especially in key sectors, and I mentioned construction, energy, transport, and waste. So there's a real need. There's a real need from employers. There's a real appetite from young people, especially, but the awareness is very low. Only 38% of students felt that they felt confident looking for a green job. And 87% said they didn't know what green skills were or what those skills would be required by the employer. So that is the kind of gap, I guess, and it's a gap, but it's an opportunity for employers and education. And Nesta made the point as their research is at the moment, especially those in education, feel that net zero and green skills is quite a narrow focus. It is around kind of renewable energy, for example, and quite a narrow focus, when what Nesta are trying to do is broaden the conversation and just show that every single job will eventually have an element of greenness to it. And they're produced enormous amounts of research, and I can connect you with them if you're interested. But this is a quick gauge, something they produced. They scraped 7 million UK jobs, and these are just a few of them. Just showing of those types of career on the left-hand side, so drivers and transport operatives, those requiring at least one green skill now, you can see is kind of 50% upwards. They've also looked at new types of green skill, what wouldn't have been thought of as a green skill previously. So project management, a couple of years ago, perhaps didn't have any green skill element to it, but now, you know, it might be 10% of that is a green skill. And looking ahead, perhaps 30%, and the same with accounting and, you know, carbon accounting and so on. So just really deep research, which if you're interested, I can send you a link to more of it, or I can connect you with Nesta. And Nesta as an organization, if you haven't heard of them, are an amazing data and research company, spun out of the government many years ago. And they're looking for new ways to apply their research, and if you want any help with your own, then they're very open to that. A quick bit of research from the Careers and Enterprise Company that I think is relevant for those of you not familiar with Careers and Enterprise Company. They're the kind of government funded careers body, and they say that for green skills the real challenge is very low awareness amongst young people about green jobs and net zero careers. So they think just 15% of young people have that awareness, and I think that is also reflected to educators as well. So again, reinforcing that gap.
William,
yeah,
the slides aren't moving. We're still on the welcome slide, so the slides aren't actually true. We can see them down the side, but we can't see them in the main screen. So I don't.
Thanks for letting me know. I think in that case, I'm just going to carry on talking because I don't know what's going on with my slides. Okay. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
That is great. So the Careers Enterprise Company are a government body, and they again reinforce that there's no awareness, very, very low, 15% awareness amongst young people of what a green career is and how they can get one. And that is a real opportunity. PwC also attended the event. We partnered with PwC on some research. They noted that of people aged 18 to 34, so a slightly broader age group than the other research, 50% would like a job in the green economy. So again, a real demand from the workforce. And if we can get it right, what PwC noted was that it aligns with that demand from the workforce, from employees. It will future-proof their work, and also an opportunity for more diversity in the workforce, because very often green jobs exist right across the country. And the challenge that PwC noted was that there is very little engagement from employers in education on this theme. You know, there are historic education programs or employer programs in schools, but there's very little to do with green skills, preparing young people and teachers for the green jobs that will exist. And my last point, I guess, again from PwC, their recommendation to business is threefold. So first of all, leverage the data that is freely available, and that might be from PwC, it might be from Nesta or other places, to identify what are those relevant skills for your industry, and map those to green skills. Optimize your recruitment process. And I was just on a meeting this week actually with Virgin O2, I think it was, telecoms, and they are beginning now to identify in their job adverts all of those skills that are required for the job that align to green skills or sustainability, and specifically call them out. And what they're noting is that the response rate has jumped significantly where they do that. And I think that's one of the kind of takeaways that this group, you know, could use when you're hiring. Actually, just go to that little bit of research, find out where the green skills map over to the roles you're advertising, and just call them out in those adverts or however you do it. And I know that our recruitment team do that in Cheltenham with great success. And then the last third point that PwC recommended, that again I think is relevant to this group, is collaborating with your local school or your local college or university, and specifically calling out kind of sustainability elements and green skills. And as a kind of coalition group, we've produced kind of resources that might be able to help you do that. I do apologise that my slides are not working.
Right.
Angela and I practiced them earlier.
We did.
They were working earlier, but they're not working now.
It's always technology, isn't it? But that's fine, because we can share them with you. And I think we wanted to bring you this because it's just really interesting what we've been talking about this morning. Is obviously we started talking about the future event that we're going to have with Cheltenham Borough Council. The economic growth of the environment is hugely important to them. We've heard from also Nathan around these huge changes that are coming, and the environment and is going to be a huge part of that on the new build, the future build, which will create more green jobs, more young people that are interested in that. So I think there's some really interesting statistics there that say, you know, young people really care about this. And if you are looking to recruit and you're finding it difficult, maybe these are some of the things that you could look at, as William said, some of the things that are going to map across into the positions that you have. And again, we'll connect you with William, and he can share some of that data and some of that research with you that might just help you think around things slightly differently and attract that top talent to your business. And being construction and property focused, again, you know, we thought that that was relevant to this morning. So thank you, William. And then I'm just mindful, again, we are coming to the end of the session. So if you have any questions for William, just hold that thought for a second, because we wanted to just briefly introduce you to Talitha. So Talitha Nelson has got a bit of an ask this morning. She's the CEO of the Gloucestershire Community Foundation. They're working on a new project and with the Nelson Trust, and they're looking for some support materials. And you all being in construction, we thought we would ask you. So Talitha, would you like to just share a little bit more about what you're doing?
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're really well and you've had a restful weekend. Thank you so much, Angela, for introducing me. Yes, we've got a programme called Invest, and part of that is around encouraging volunteering and pro bono. This is a particularly exciting certainly for construction people. We've saved a pocket garden from becoming a car park. So we're really thrilled. It's in the middle of Gloucester at Conduit Street. GCF gets gifted all sorts of things. In fact, community foundations do property, all sorts of things. And we got gifted a garden. We weren't quite sure what to do with it. And the part of convincing the board that we shouldn't be selling it as a car park was finding an amazing partner in the Nelson Trust who are going to manage the project. Now, essentially, it is quite a small garden, but has huge potential. We've already had pro bono offers and support from Charles Russell Speechley, who've donated £4,000 of legal costs to get this garden up and running. And the Robert Hitchens Group have supported already with about £7,000 for a polytunnel, planting, etc. So there's a volunteering day which people can get involved, and that is for volunteering week on the 6th of June, and I think Suzanne has been coordinating that, and that is to come along and help out. So there's two parts: volunteering and coming to support the garden, and also pro bono. The big thing that we're looking for is a shelter. So if there's anyone in construction, and maybe if they've got an X display or materials, essentially they need a shelter, so it's pretty open, and also for privacy. So the Nelson Trust will be using it to do therapeutic work with the women when they come out of prison. They're no threat to anybody. They've often come from backgrounds of trauma, so to be able to come into a garden and work therapeutically is going to be really instrumental in their recovery. In between their own use at the Nelson Trust, it'll be open to the community. Now, when I was filming and did a little film, I put it on LinkedIn, some teachers came along and started chatting to me from around the corner, and I was absolutely gobsmacked. I thought every child had access to grass, and they said they didn't have any outside space for the children. And I can't believe kids go to schools and just have a concrete pad to run around on. So it was pretty enlightening already, just the need for this garden and for the children to have access to growing, planting. So it's a really, really exciting project. So Sam is the coordinator at the Nelson Trust, and I can share those details with you. So just quickly, we also have a poverty appeal, which we're raising £100,000, and we're doing GCF's Great Escape. For those of you who haven't heard already, it's a brilliant car rally across the Cotswolds. So we say, have you travelled 400 miles to Cornwall and back to explore the area and spend a lot of money, but haven't done it on your own doorstep? So we're giving you the opportunity to drive the Cotswolds from the Feathered Nest across to Lord Vestey will be hosting dinner on his estate, a late lunch. And essentially it's £85 per person, a driver and co-driver. The tickets are worth £145, so we just asked for a donation to the Poverty Hurts Appeal. But it's an amazing day on the 30th of June. We also are launching this week, if anyone's interested in sponsoring, if you've got some electric cars and they're branded, then a great opportunity to get your logos and branding out there. So do get in touch. So that's it from me. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you. Thanks, Talitha. And